There's so much going on in the world right now, especially in the world of Bitcoin, that it's almost hard to keep up. Obviously, the war in Russia and Ukraine is the main focus, with Ukraine raising over $40 million now in crypto donations, then saying they were going to do an airdrop, then saying they're not going to do an airdrop, and kind of triggering the crypto community there. We have so much to discuss today, and I have an absolutely epic panel and probably more surprise guests, just like last week. We have Bill Barhydt, Steve McClurg, Dave Weisberger, Sahil Bloom, Chen, Max Boonen, Paolo Arduino, Avishal Garg, and Memli Krasnicki all queued up. I have no idea how long this is going to go. It's as much an experiment for me as it is for you guys, but we are going to have an epic conversation. Let's go.
Let's go.
What is up, everybody? I'm Scott Melker, also known as the Wolf of All Streets. Before we get started, please fulfill your contractual obligation to subscribe to any YouTube channel that you view, and also hit the like button on every video. You actually get banned from YouTube if you don't do that. So, guys, obviously, last week most of you were witness to the spontaneous roundtable that I did on Thursday. Was planned to be a quick stream, and we just had guests continually rolling in. And what turned out to be really an educational, incredible conversation. I learned a ton and really gave the guests room to have conversations among themselves and talk about the most important topics in crypto. Now, from the top, I want to tell you, pretty crazy. Today, my producer, Mike, who you guys met actually on a live stream 2 days ago, he joined us, obviously, from St. Petersburg in Russia. He is not here. I'll be managing this all by myself. And he said that it's okay to discuss this, but he is literally on a bus fleeing Russia. Word on the street there is that males of his age either will be heading to jail if they've been protesting, or will likely be conscripted into the army. I cannot speak to the veracity of it. I can just say that strong enough of a claim that he is currently leaving the country as we speak. So I will be managing this myself. Forgive me if there's any technical errors or anything of the sort. So as I said, we're going to have rolling guests. I'm going to bring on the first three who are present right now. I've got Bill Barhydt, the CEO of Abra, Steve McClurg, the co-founder of Valkyrie, also the chief. You're the chief. I literally forget you're the chief investment officer. I always want to call you CEO, Leah, obviously. And my good friend, Sahil Bloom here, who literally all of you know. I think pretty much if you follow me, you probably follow him, but he's investor at SRB Ventures and the host of Where It Happens podcast, which I was recently on. What's up, guys? How you doing today?
Good morning.
Awesome. Good to see you guys.
Great to have all of you. So listen, obviously, I mean, I think the topic that's on everyone's mind right now is obviously the war that's happening. But for us, of course, discussing the role that Bitcoin and crypto have been playing it. As I said at the top, I mean, Ukrainian government, since we had this conversation a week ago, literally posted their Bitcoin, Ethereum, now TRX, I believe, USDT dot addresses for donations, and have raised over $40 million. I want to hear what you guys make of this, seeing a country do this, but also, in my opinion, this seems to sort of invalidate a lot of the negative cases against crypto when you see what good it's doing. Bill, I know obviously that you have strong thoughts always on the sort of power of Bitcoin and the importance of it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's playing out the rule book that everybody was talking about 12 years ago. You know, I mean, I got into crypto Bitcoin originally for remittances, and now we're actually seeing the remittance use case play out, and it's super awesome. I do worry a little bit about some of the privacy issues, and I hope that people are taking care with how they use it. But it's playing out, and I think a lot of the government narrative, particularly the left narrative, and it's on the right as well, that this is all sanction avoidance is just nonsense. I haven't seen it at all. Everybody who's got any kind of centralized service is pretty much blocking places that are not only sanctioned, but probably going broader, because it's really hard technically to do very narrow sanctions on an IP basis. And so what we're seeing is a really valid kind of remittance oriented use case here And we're also seeing a lot of the privacy coins getting used. I don't know if you saw what happened with Tornado Cash the last couple of days through the roof, which
sure.
I also expected. We can get into that. But I think a lot of the privacy technologies are going to see a big boom as a result of concerns, unfounded concerns for what's going on here. But I'm really excited that we're seeing this work. I wish it wasn't under these circumstances. I mean, the first city fell apparently overnight, and Russians are outside Odessa. So look, it's horrible and to a certain degree depressing what's happening. But I'm glad to see at least we have a way to at least try to get some amount of money to the right people.
So you mentioned obviously the sanctions, and I think that there's huge misunderstanding, and it's become the Bitcoin's only for criminals, energy concerns. You list all the China ban, you list all the FUD we've ever had. Our new one now is that countries are going to avoid sanctions by using crypto. It's complete nonsense if you understand what sanctions are, right? I mean, if Putin was going to do that, he would have built the crypto infrastructure long ago if that was intention. He literally built an entire infrastructure for avoiding sanctions that had nothing to do with crypto, right? Gold, yuan, all these things. But also, sanction, people seem to be confused. A sanction is cutting Russia off from the U.S. economy. That's the goal. If you're in the United States, it's just as illegal for you to violate that using crypto as anything else. And I don't think that people are jumping to end up in jail by violating sanctions just because it's Bitcoin instead of dollars, right? So, Hill, listen, you did an amazing thread about SWIFT and what it is and what it really means. They saw Russia's being cut off by SWIFT, and all of a sudden it was like they're going to use crypto instead. That's completely unfounded, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I'm struggling a little bit. I'm curious for what you guys think about this. It seems like from the outside looking in that Russia and Putin have been surprised by the extent of some of the financial sanctions that have been imposed here. Like, especially, I think the SWIFT thing and then the central bank asset freeze, like something like, I think there was like 640 billion of total reserves that Russia had, and like half of it was sitting in foreign Western banks. The US and EU came out and said they were going to freeze it. And it seemed like that shocked them. And I'm just struggling to reconcile that with, a situation where I have to imagine they've thought through all of the different, potential angles or vectors that they're going to be attacked on. And I'm curious what other people think of, like, is that really something that surprised them? Was it that crazy that the US and West went and did that?
No, I don't think it's crazy at all. I mean, in a previous life, I was involved in emerging market and sovereign debt. And we used to always have a joke that, if you're Argentina or Russia, you're going to default every 10 years. And but they heavily rely on the West, and particularly U.S. markets, in order to issue debt and to raise treasury in their country. As a matter of fact, right after the last financial crisis, we immediately went into the sovereign credit crisis. And Russia was really struggling during that period of time. I mean, they really couldn't, look like they were going to miss debt service. They were going to miss other types of payments and obligations. And then all of a sudden oil went up, a few years later, and then they were able to actually, pay for things again. But the way to attack Russia it's not necessarily even going after the citizens, the individual citizens, because they really wield no power. It's going after the oligarchs. And that's what's happening right now, taking their yachts, freezing their accounts, taking their properties overseas. And they're the ones that apply the most pressure on Putin. He really doesn't care about the rank and file citizens of the country. Yeah. I actually think that's great, because in Russia, they're utilizing Bitcoin to pay for things right now. Milk, bread, and the ones that are being harmed are really the the wealthy.
Yeah, but I think Treasury, I think the CIA, I think they've been planning this actually for years. I think they had an underlying assumption that at some point they were going to need to contain Putin, and it's pretty obvious in the magnitude and speed at which this was done. These aren't basically like, just off switches on a wall. You go and the factory's off. I think this was a coordinated effort, and I've spoken to folks at both agencies, and I get the impression that there's a containment kind of strategy here. That's a playbook that they've had for years. They've been sitting on a gets updated regularly. Obviously, they scrambled in the last minute to make sure that they could pull all this off, but it's outside of China, where they're sitting on probably, I don't know, 100 to 200 billion dollars in yuan bonds. I mean, they're really isolated now. And then the question becomes, what is China willing to do? Is China willing to barter and risk becoming a pariah here, given that they've switched from kind of, I don't know what they originally called it, but now the word they're using is invasion. And do they really want to isolate themselves, given their new stance, to start bartering outside of the SWIFT system? And I think they'll do some, but I honestly think that Russia is going to be way more isolated than Putin thought.
Yeah, China was one of.
Sahil, that's your point, though. Like, that's your point. Is all of that? Russia had to know that this was going to happen. Or is this just a miscalculation by Putin? Did he think it'd be over in 2 days and they wouldn't even have time to do it? Sahil, I know you're going to talk.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think he. And this is stupid. I'm not a military strategist. I don't know. I did have a long conversation with a friend who was a senior military officer, recently retired, and I was asking him this exact question. And his perspective was like, Putin saw the U.S.'s exit from Afghanistan as this like moment in time when there was a huge vulnerability and we were pulling back from something. And basically like the 6-month period that has happened since that announcement is like the amount of time it takes to mobilize significant military action. And that's kind of well known within military ranks. And so he kind of viewed it as like, this has been in the works. On the U.S. side, we've known it for a long time, as you said, Bill or Steven, I forget which one of you said that. And we're kind of horse trading and jockeying around all this stuff. And unfortunately, Ukraine is in the actual, position, the tragic position of sitting there during it. The China position on it is kind of interesting to me to watch. They were one of 30 countries, I think, that abstained from something in the most recent UN vote around, kind of the sweeping condemnation of what Russia had done, which is, symbolic and didn't really have any effect as a lot of what the UN does. But it was interesting, right? It was North Korea, Syria, Russia, and Eritrea or something.
And Belarus, I think.
And Belarus, which is basically
and one other. Eritrea.
But China has abstained, and China's professional at saying a lot while saying nothing. That is what they're very good at. So it'll be interesting to see how they actually react in the days to come.
Yeah. Well, what's really interesting is watching time horizons of different countries and cultures, right? In the US, we think in very short time frames. And, Russia has a much longer game than us, right? We're playing checkers while they're playing chess. And Putin this has been in the works for 20 years, right? I mean, he invaded Georgia, nothing happened. He invaded Crimea. There were some sanctions, but nothing really happened. And this has been in the works for a long time. I mean, the Crimea invasion was, how long ago was that? 8 years ago. So he's been waiting, and this one, I think he's probably biting off a little more than he could chew. But China has an even longer time horizon, and Taiwan is still in their crosshairs, but they're waiting for the right moment. And I believe that if Russia had been successful, and I don't think they're going to be successful, and they're not successful right now with Ukraine, I think China probably would have made a move in Taiwan and even the Philippines. So I think that their time horizon is a lot longer. They're waiting to see what happens. They could have gone in either direction, and now they're just kind of staying silent and holding back. But they have their own strategy, and we should be careful about that. The other thing about China, really quick, is the currency issue that we just talked about. China has been, for the last, since really 2004, 2005, been going into emerging market countries that are high commodity producers and building trade relationships, buying land, making investments, slowly creating influence in all of these places, and slowly trying to use the yuan. And it's not something they're trying to achieve tomorrow. It's something they're trying to achieve over the next 50 years.
Did you guys see the stat about the amount of donations to Ukraine that had come through crypto versus like formal kind of UN support and channels? It was pretty crazy.
$40 million. And it's direct as opposed to through some agency that's going to waste 95% of it building shopping malls and McDonald's.
But the numbers were like, yesterday when I saw it, I think it was something like 36 had come through crypto. So it's way more than that now, it sounds like. But the UN had only had 20 million of support come in directly. I just thought it was such a striking fact of, it's like crypto is painted by all of these large, political organizations and bigwigs as this negative thing and, a tool for scammers and fraudsters, et cetera. And then you just have these like striking data points that prove otherwise. And how do people like that reconcile those two kind of facts that are directly countering one another?
They don't bother. That's the problem. Is instead of trying to reconcile the facts, they jump to the sanctions, right? That's all of a sudden Ukraine was having this success, and forget even Ukraine. Canada was on the world stage seeing people give Bitcoin donations to the trucker protest, obviously. And that's really what put Bitcoin sort of donations in light, and in a country where people actually cared much more about what the government was doing, in my opinion. And then you saw what happened in Ukraine, and then you hear politicians in the United States say, but there's still got to be something bad here, right? We got to find it. Let's go with sanctions. It's like they play the wheel of FUD, and they spin it, and then you just pick. Like tomorrow, I'm sure India will reban crypto or something, or China will do something.
Well,
right?
It worked after 9/11, right? I mean, when we got the Patriot Act, and everybody was assuming that all of these international banks were in cahoots with Al Qaeda, and it turns out they were just using Western Union to pay flight schools in Florida, and here we have basically the best international transfer system we've ever had, right? I mean, going back all the way to Silk Road times, and immediately let's ban it.
But what I find so interesting about it, like when zooming out for the context of Bitcoin, is that it seems impressively to have this evolving narrative, right? I mean, every single year we find, or it comes back to an existing one that we forgot about. Digital gold store value, but as you say, you got into it for remittances, and we're back there now, right? Now it's actually becoming peer-to-peer cash again. Steve, as you said, they're literally spending it on the ground in Russia, right? And a few months ago, we were saying nobody wants to spend Bitcoin. They're gonna save it.
I think it's the Russian part that people underestimated. I think the Ukrainian part actually makes sense. I think Putin, to a certain degree, accepted the fact that the world may try to isolate him, but the whole NATO, the idea of Ukraine joining NATO was too much of a line in the sand, and we can debate whether he's insane and miscalculate all that stuff. But it's the usage I'm seeing in Russia now. And the protests in the streets and the people fleeing, the journalists fleeing Russia, right? That's the part that is surprising me the most. I mean, the game theory of what's happening in Ukraine in terms of the donations and everything else actually makes a lot of sense. I think we've all, including Putin, miscalculated his own people's reaction to this and what's going on. And you mentioned your producer fleeing, and we've got people there trying to get out. And I think it was a gross miscalculation on that part.
Yeah, and Mike, my producer, I mean, when he was on here the other day, he said, if you even pick up a sign in the street, you're arrested, like insta jail. So I think there's still obviously this mass fear on the streets that you can't really protest it, but clearly underlying, I mean, they're starting to make it difficult to use YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I mean, they're pretty much siloing themselves off from the rest of the world. At least the Russian
You're going to see all those social media services cut off. I predict within a month, all of them.
Yeah, it's really nuts.
Yeah.
It's really
well, one of the things that's interesting, and this is a little bit more controversial, is there's been some of the crypto exchanges have refused to not work with Russian citizens, and they had really good points, and they've been really slammed by that by some powerful politicians. But I actually think it's the right move. If you really take a step back and look at it, you're enabling citizens of Russia to stop using the ruble, right?
Right.
And that causes a further collapse of the ruble if they're just dumping the ruble for Bitcoin and using Bitcoin to transact among themselves.
But Treasury
So
gets
the best thing to do is to allow that to happen among the
Yeah.
citizens, so that
I never even thought about that side of
Yeah.
it. But wait, Bill, you're a CEO of a crypto exchange, right? Or we
So,
call it an exchange.
my belief is OFAC gets this. They get Steve's point, which is we don't want to cripple the economy of people to be able to buy bread. We want to cripple the oligarchs and the people that basically are supporting Putin, that are enabling him. And that's why they sanctions very specific transaction hashes and public IDs, right? So the challenge, of course, is how do you basically implement that in a way that is guaranteed to prevent those people from accessing crypto? It's very hard. So, for example, we've had to basically block Russia temporarily while we figure out, and we'll probably have it live in a couple of days, a solution that only blocks the sanctioned people or the sanctioned addresses, because they can't really, when it comes to crypto, they can't really sanction people. You can, but it's there's a million tricks that people do. So anyway, so that's something that we're working on. It's very hard to do technically, and especially in real time, right? So because you don't want the people in 100 other countries to suffer while you're trying to basically make sure that you are compliant with OFAC sanctions, like 150 transaction hashes out of a billion, right? So it's very complicated to implement, and all these politicians that are complaining about crypto exchanges that are trying, they don't even understand what I'm talking about right now. They wouldn't even be able to follow this conversation, but yet they have an opinion. It's infuriating to some degree, because Steve, you nailed it. I mean, this should be the narrative. The narrative should be we should basically pound the ruble into the ground. We should be getting them access to stable coins and Bitcoin and like Tornado Cash or whatever it needs to be to maintain privacy and safety. And until he realizes that the world is not going to accept, this level of tyranny.
That's so interesting. You said that obviously you guys are personally dealing with this, and you're going to have to eventually try to figure out which wallets to block. But I mean, all of us use crypto. How hard is it for someone who's a billionaire to find a creative way to open a wallet that is not immediately being tracked? It seems like that's just going to be an endless game of cat and mouse. It's not going to end.
Yeah, it's almost impossible. Unless you already have the crypto or you own a miner, it's almost impossible. Because look, how do you get $1 billion in fiat into Bitcoin? And you want to avoid the banking system or use cash? The two are almost impossible today. I don't know of a way to do it, and I've been doing this for 7-8 years. So unless you're basically taking a suitcase of cash to somebody who's got a USB drive, who physically hands you a private key that you trust to know that there's not another copy of that private key somewhere, there's no way. There really isn't.
Hey, look, I mean, it's hard enough for me to open up an Abra account for my children, right? Because and I say that because you guys have rules you have to follow.
Yeah.
Right. And my children are under 18. I wanted to open up an account. I can't. Right. There's literally nobody out there that can open an account, even for my kids coming from a U.S. bank.
Yeah.
So it's that much harder. And by the way, I'm saying that in a good way, right? Because like that, you're following all the rules. You're doing what you're supposed to do. So
I would love for you to be able to open up an account for your kids.
Yeah. Have a Russian account, or,
Bill,
or a non-Russian bank account where you're a known Russian citizen and be able to move the fiat. It's the fiat on and off ramps that really prevent this from happening.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we just saw price obviously rage 17-18% in a day a few days ago, sort of when all of this started to transpire. Is that a technical short squeeze, or is that really Ukrainians and Russians buying crypto en masse? We've obviously seen some volume increases there. Do you think that this is a narrative play, or do you think that it's a fundamental play where price is going up because so many people are buying it because they need it?
Yeah, I think unfortunately the amount of money we're talking about in Russia and Ukraine right now, even with the increased volumes, is not enough to move the price versus the accumulation we saw in January and February, which also didn't move the price. So unfortunately, I do think it's mostly technicals. If you look at where we're at, technicals, Fibonacci levels, it's pretty clear. that Bitcoin is in a kind of a sideways accumulation phase still on a long-term basis, and it's kind of lost right now. And I think it's going to take a few more weeks to play itself out. But I don't think there's enough money coming in or coming out via Bitcoin at this point to actually move the price needle in crypto in general, or create a halo effect in other cryptocurrencies. The narrative is fantastic for crypto, right? I mean, I'll take that all day. But the reality is, from a price perspective, I think we're going to be stuck in that kind of 30 to 60K range, I think, for many more months, at least at this point.
I love, though, in crypto, we're like, it could be a couple more weeks or months and that we could go up, double. That's problematic.
Right. Exactly. And I mean, like, it could literally be another year for all I know.
Yeah, sure. Of course. Steve, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's speculators that are moving the price. The problem right now with Bitcoin is that it's a 24/7 market, and it's a market that people have ability to access when other markets are down. So if there's news, rather than waiting until the market open like we used to and trade equities, you just immediately trade Bitcoin because that's the thing that's available to trade immediately. And so on this news, I think there's just speculators in saying, oh, well, a lot of people in Ukraine and Russia are going to be buying Bitcoin, therefore we're going to front run it. This is a great idea. Look, I think it's good in the long run because it creates more open markets, but at the same time, since it's really the only market that you can access, it is used as a highly speculative instrument.
Yeah.
Right, but isn't that a case for making all markets 24/7 and not a case against Bitcoin? I mean, that's the problem with all markets, is that if a war starts at 5:30 p.m. on Friday, you can't react to it financially until Monday morning.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and with P2P transactions, they're ephemeral, right? So you have buyers and sellers constantly coming in and out. It's not a speculative use case, and given the small amounts of money involved versus the size of the trading markets in crypto, it's not going to move the needle anytime soon. I'm sure, I haven't looked at Paxful's numbers in the last couple of days, but they were going up for sure last week. And I haven't looked. I should really open up the charts and look right now. But again, it's not going to move the needle. We would need a solid 100 million people coming in with $1,000 a piece to move the needle, I think.
Yeah, I think Willy Woo had posted a chart about local Bitcoin saying that there hadn't been much meaningful movement on the ground in Ukraine and Russia. But I think that's also a bit skewed, because if the idea is that people are rushing into Bitcoin as a safe haven, well, then your citizens are not going to be buying and selling them from one another, right? For someone to want to buy it, you'd have to have someone selling it for the exact same reason. So that, to me, I don't think we would see that much peer-to-peer volume on the ground if the narrative was correct. I think we'd be seeing citizens buying them on external exchanges and holding them.
Yep. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Steve, when are we going to get a spot ETF?
Not this year. My very frank opinion is not during the Biden administration.
That's right.
And probably not as long as we have Gensler. There's very much a desire to hold Bitcoin off from getting any bigger than it is in the current administration. So we'll see what happens next. I know there's a few folks out there that are really advertising the fact that they are going to launch a spot Bitcoin ETF this year, and I don't know where they're getting that information.
Yeah, I think there's no chance. I think if Maxine Waters had an off switch for Bitcoin right now, she'd flip it. And I think she'd call in, Warren and Gensler and say, look what I found, an off switch for Bitcoin. Boop, that would be it. And, my dream scenario would be Loomis ends up in a new administration's cabinet or vice president ticket or something like that. And basically pushes a new Republican administration to approve an ETF, or I wouldn't be surprised if DCG funds a court battle to say the SEC has an obligation in terms of basically enabling, investment opportunities to approve this. And I think they would make a very good case. I'm not a lawyer, but I think as much as I understand about the SEC's writ, I think the DCG would have a very good case, and I could see them bringing more resources to bear than the SEC would, just like Ripple's doing, right? I mean, that's what the SEC underestimated is the fact that Ripple can afford more lawyers than the SEC can on this case. And I think Barry's in the same boat. At some point, he's going to be a cat pushed into a corner and say, fine, I'll fight. And I really think, now I also think he's done the game theory on this and is looking at this and going, okay, Biden's very unpopular right now. If this continues, we're going to get another Republican administration as long as there's not a nut on the ticket. And, then I think gives a ETF a much better chance, and he might wait that out for a couple of years to see what happens.
Yeah. One thing I want to point out too, and we're still a democracy in the U.S., and I'm neither Democrat nor Republican, but I'm definitely supporting people that are pro Bitcoin. Some of the people that are anti-Bitcoin would include people like Elizabeth Warren and Brad Sherman. I actually just donated to a woman named Erica Rhodes. Maximum. I mean, this is all public information. My maximum donation possible. Who's trying to unseat him through the primary process. She's a Democrat. I met with her a week ago, and look, I mean, we have to start putting our money where our mouth is. If we're serious here, I don't think I've ever given to a political party ever, and this was my first time. So I think we've got to really look. We've got to really carefully consider who's out there, who's doing what, who our friends are, who our enemies are, and support the people that are going to support us.
Yep.
I think it's interesting because people have clearly, over the last few years, it seems, become either you're just so ideological and you just believe everything that's with one party, or you've become just a one-issue voter, right? You find that thing that's the most meaningful for you and you vote based on that. And I don't think most politicians saw this coming for crypto, with 60, maybe 80 million people in the United States who have exposure, slowly becoming their one issue.
Yeah.
You just summed it up anecdotally. I feel effectively the same way, but I feel that now a ton of people are just looking for those pro crypto candidates, regardless of party, and that's where they're going to go. Because everything else is on fire anyways.
Yeah.
I think the SEC, what did the subpoena that they gave out at Ryan Selkis's conference, I think that was a turning point for a lot of people. I really do. And I think Ryan was very clever in how he leveraged that to basically make himself a one-issue voter over, many months of tweeting following. And I think he's going to basically have a little parade behind him of one-issue voters and use the Messari voice to do it. And I think there's a lot of folks now that Samson has left Blockstream. I think he's going to basically try to rally a lot of folks in different countries around this issue. And I think you're going to see a lot of, people coming at it from different perspectives, like Maxi's over here and folks like Ryan over here. And you're going to see lots of different parades coalesce over time, a very short time, in my opinion, around this kind of idea of a new monetary model and a new financial model of that represents freedom for many of us who don't believe in the current system.
Yeah. Well, and I would even go a little bit broader too. I wouldn't call myself a one-issue voter for Bitcoin, but I care more about just general freedom and choice, right? And financial freedom and choice is a big part of that. But I was going to say, Bill, you're right. I mean, Cynthia Lummis is absolutely amazing. I mean, and then you have Warren Davidson, who has been really, really fighting on that front as well in the House. And then you have some great governors too, like DeSantis and Abbott, and then a lot of other people are jumping on board too, like Ted Cruz and why can't I think of his name right now? Bill Haggerty. There's one more, but I'll think about it in a minute. But yeah, there's a lot of people that are really coming on board this whole concept of financial freedom, and I think we really should be supporting them.
Along those lines, though, you just bring up Ted Cruz, and it makes me laugh because he's the perfect example of the extremes of this sort of one issue voter mentality. I mean, that was the guy who was literally getting roasted for running away from COVID, and then all of a sudden it's like, I own 1 Bitcoin. I've spent $50,000, and everyone's like, forgiven for everything. You own Bitcoin.
Exactly.
Right?
Well, the important thing with Cruz is he's like, he kind of got on. He asked the question. People came alongside and started talking to him about it, and then it clicked for him, and now he's fighting for it, right? So there might be a lot of other things there, but he's not just saying, yeah, I own Bitcoin, but he's actually out there, fighting for it in the Senate. And
that's interesting point. Do we ever see anyone go the other direction? No. Never.
Not successful.
That's what I find so incredible about Bitcoin is everyone who when it clicks forever. And I always talk about sort of the idea of strong opinions weakly held. Like Michael Saylor was dismissive of Bitcoin. All these billionaires who own Bitcoin now were originally dismissive of it. Rightfully so. They didn't get it yet. It wasn't on their radar. Mm-hmm. But once they're into it, you've never seen any of them turn the other way, right? You're in.
Yeah. I was dismissive in the beginning, of course.
Yeah. So I think if you look at Saylor, Pomp, for example, who has had a narrative around this, and there's a whole bunch of folks. And just look at Twitter following growth for people, and we've looked at this. By the way, our marketing teams actually looked at it over time, and you can actually track people's excitement for certain voices based on the narrative. I have not looked at Ted Cruz's Twitter following, but I am willing to bet you it has exploded again
for sure
since his last presidential primary run, and he gets it. There's no denying. I'm sure as people are going to him and say, look at this number and look at this number, whatever you're talking about, keep doing it, right? And now he gets it, and that's great. I have no problem with that because it's if they're supposed to represent someone, right? They are political representatives. Right. What are you representing? Well, if you're representing what the people want, and all these people are telling you they want to be free to transact unencumbered by unnecessary legislation, Bitcoin represents an opportunity for you to support that principle. And it works.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Guys, I want to bring in another guest as we got him rolling and we got people waiting in the wings. For those of you who've never watched my podcast with Chen, so if we want to talk about institutional adoption, these things, what's happening in the United States, this is definitely my guy. He's the head of blockchain practice US at Ernst & Young and has been for a very long time. We recently talked about, obviously, KPMG buying Bitcoin in Canada, how huge news. But Ernst & Young is part of the Big Four and has been way deep down the blockchain rabbit hole for a very long time. Chen, man, thank you so much for joining us. I know you've been listening in the wings. Any immediate thoughts?
Let's start with, I love the discussion about Kiev in Russia and the fact that there's two sides to this coin. Pun intended. I do agree there is risks that we need to control, but let's start with the fact that we acknowledge that this technology is here and this technology is available, and it is very, very difficult to stop it at this point. As I'm representing EY, I would say there's two things certain in life: death and taxes, and as such, you won't hear from me support to a completely pseudo-anonymous network. I think that taxes should be paid as they're owed, and as such, I would want to see more KYC capabilities. But having said that, there are a lot of benefits to citizens suffering on both sides, the Russian side and the Ukrainian side, that this technology helps alleviate. And when we evaluate is this good or bad, we need to not just look at oligarchs' ability to circumvent sanctions, but also the different citizens' ability to run away from the ruble, for example.
I mean, I think that makes the important point, which, I mean, Bitcoin is neutral. It's a technology, right? And when the politicians sort of play it in this role where it's the oligarchs are going to circumvent sanctions, which we know is not true, using Bitcoin. Well, you know, when somebody uses the internet wrong, you deal with the user. You don't kill the internet, right? And so I think it's just really important. They act like it almost, the narrative is like Bitcoin is taking a side. It's nonsense.
And exactly. And I think that's so important to understand in terms of when you look at the law, the law doesn't discuss technology. It's that the law discusses what's right and what's wrong. And when we build on public blockchains that solutions that are going to be used by regulated institutions, we build the solutions in order to comply with the existing law. And that's possible. And saying, no, you can't use a technology doesn't make sense. Putting in laws in place and making sure that the technology or the use case abides by the law is a totally different story. And that is something that we obviously can do.
Well, all three of you are in a position where you're dealing with that to some degree, right? You're building products that have to be compliant with the law. Okay, well, how do you do that when you don't know what the law is going to be?
Right.
Anyone,
yeah,
Bill, I mean, like,
look,
you said
we deal with 100 countries right now in terms of CIP requirements, customer identification, what the individual local jurisdictions KYC requirements are. And basically it's a massive, we look at it as a massive grid, right? Meaning what service are you offering? Where are they? What's the local requirement? What's the macro requirement? Anyway, so we're constantly having to ask people for more stuff. And we end up with angry users constantly. Why am I giving you this? Why am I giving you this? Why do I need to know this? Why do I need to know this? And, you know, they don't understand. I don't have a single user who feels protected because they're giving me all this stuff. Now, we have no intention of fighting the law. We have every intention of trying to make it easier to comply. But I've never met a user that says, thank God you're asking me for source of funds, or thank God you're asking me for a new copy of my updated passport or driver's license. It just doesn't happen. People don't get it. They're not interested in government intrusion. And if you explain to people one-on-one, hey, we're just complying with this Patriot Act. Why do they call this the Patriot Act again? Right? That's
good marketing.
Like customers will ask me, why does the U.S. government call this the Patriot Act? I don't get it. And I say, well, I mean, it's marketing. The government's allowed to do marketing. I don't agree with it, but they're allowed, right? And Patriot Act is the best piece of intrusive marketing probably in American history, right? I mean, what a better way.
I have a question, but it's what you're saying is like saying I have never met a citizen that likes to pay taxes. It's the same thing. Like, I understand that it's much nicer not to pay taxes.
It's not the same thing. It's not.
Why would you say that?
It's not because we basically have agreed over 250 years via representative government that there are certain services either at a micro community level, a community level, state level, or federal level that we need to provide. Okay. In banking, it used to be that we had a police, and if you broke the law, they would come after you, right? Policing is supposed to be reactive, right? In general, that's a free society. In a free society, policing is reactive. In banking, we now spend $1 trillion collectively a year globally to make policing proactive, which is direct violation, in my humble opinion, of every idea of freedom and liberty that I've ever read about regards to anything. Okay. And yeah.
So let me the way and I don't remember where I heard this example, but I really liked it. Guarding and protecting the new financial rails that is blockchain technology, and by now I would call it Web3 technology, is similar to the way we are protecting and guarding behavior on the highways, right? At the point of someone driving on a highway, we don't know who that person is. at best we know a license plate number, and we guard against violations. And if we need to know who is behind the license plate number, then we kind of lift the screen and go and investigate. And in that regard, that is what I'm hoping would happen here as well. And I think that is something also the opinion you expressed can live with. So
yes.
Do I agree that the government needs to know all the time proactively who owns every wallet? No, this is, I would say, almost anti-democratic. But do we need to have a way to identify, to lift the screen between a digital address and the person behind it? Yes, we do, because that's how we will make blockchain behave similar to enforcement over the highways.
Sure.
And that is the direction I think this would go.
Yeah, look, I have no problem with the idea that a custodial service, whether it's in traditional banking or new, has some semblance of who you are and has a reasonable idea of who you are. But now everybody's so paranoid, right? If you look at SAR filings, suspicious activity report filings, banks, money transmitters, and others, they used to have pretty rigid rules for when they would have to file a SAR. This guy never really deposited a lot of money. All of a sudden, he's depositing $5 million. Now, every bank is and money transmitter and crypto companies so paranoid that they're filing such insane amounts of these SAR reports to Treasury that no one could ever process them. So they just sit there and they say, hey, I've fulfilled my obligations. So what Treasury gets by default is effectively a database of every meaningful transaction happening in the United States, because everybody's afraid not to file one transaction that could ultimately be the one that maybe somebody put a dirty bomb in their shoe and got caught by TSA. And the fact that they bought that shoe at a Nike store at a mall wasn't reported in a suspicious transaction, right? So this is how compliance officers are being forced to think right now, because we basically, it's not even close to what you're describing, right? I would be thrilled if we had what you're describing.
I think that this is exactly where this would go, and we're seeing it already with the latest fraud. I don't remember the names that was discovered in New York. The 2.6 billion. Bitfinex. Thank you. So the fact that the Fed were able to trace back in such a level of granularity and details the transactions that happened 3 and 4 years back. The way I see this going is zero knowledge enforcement, right? And by the fact that we now have an immutable financial system that we can put bots to monitor and identify the same way we have speeding cameras on the highway, that's where it would go eventually.
But that's what happened, right? They were not KYC'd or AML'd for hacking, and they eventually got caught, which is the beauty of a public blockchain. I think we're kind of talking like Bill's talking about how absolutely annoying, impossible it is in real time. And you're speaking correctly about what it could look like in principle and how it should be. And those are a wide, massive gap in difference between those two things.
Reactive policing makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, go find the person who did the hack. They found him.
I worry a lot about where Bitcoin is from a privacy perspective. Bitcoin doesn't need me. Bitcoin doesn't need us. It doesn't need Ukraine. It doesn't need the banks. It doesn't need people. It just is. Use it or don't use it. It's just software. But as somebody who wants to improve software, I do worry about where we are from a privacy perspective after 12 years, right? And it's hard, right? Everything is a trade-off, right? I mean, if you look at the ways, the way Zcash works and zk snarks work, I mean, it's very expensive technology from an implementation perspective, and there's a good reason why it's not in Bitcoin. But I do think at some point for Bitcoin to regain like the true P2P narrative for those small dollar transactions, it's going to have to address this privacy issue. And I think that Lightning, and I get slammed constantly for saying this, and I'm sure it'll happen again. I mean, Lightning is not fully private. There's no such thing as a fully private Bitcoin transaction today. Yeah, and I honestly hope that changes, because true fungibility, true privacy, UTXOs that can't be marked, is our best chance for financial freedom, in my opinion.
So representing, a more an accounting firm, I would say, the way we look at this is something like for example, a KYC token that exists in a wallet that was issued by a financial services organization, be it a crypto native or a traditional financial company, where someone knows who this wallet belongs to, and that someone isn't necessarily the government, but there is this separation that is very similar to the separation that we have today. But still, I have the ability to transact in privacy and freedom in front of the entire world. But when the regulator wants to know who this wallet belongs to, there is a way to lift the screen and get to that knowledge fairly easily. I think it's not as progressive as what you're describing, but still will allow us to get to a good point that is definitely better than today.
Yep, we'll see.
And by the way, that's true not just for the Bitcoin network. That's true for Ethereum for sure, and the Ethereum ecosystem, I would say.
Yeah. Look, I mean, Ethereum ecosystem is a totally different story, because right now, using stable coins, I mean, the government can just confiscate the dollars, right? That's a totally different issue, and so we'll see.
Yeah, Bill, I know you probably have to head out. And Steve had an appearance on CNBC in 5 minutes, which is why he casually bounced. The whole format here is, guys, people just come on and leave. I see the comments like, he just disappeared. The Feds got him. No, I think we're fine. But Bill, thank you so much. My pleasure. And I'm going to, awesome, man. Have a great day. And thank you so much for joining. And I've got 2 more guests to bring on while Bill is leaving us. I've got Dave Weisberger, who you all should know by now because he seems to be here all the time. And of course, CEO of CoinRoutes, for those who don't know. And Max, what's up, Max Boonen, who I believe you're on our side of the pond today. Max, I've also had on the podcast. I think everyone here I've had on the podcast, the founder of B2C2, which I don't know if you're the biggest, but you're certainly the first aggressive market maker in the space. And I don't know if you guys have been listening. We kind of been talking about regulation and the rails. Chen, the point that I made before, and this is not necessarily to you, when I was saying that all 3 people who we were talking to, and everybody here as well, like, you're all dealing with the idea of regulation that might come with no clarity, right? So, like, it's one thing to say, yes, we'll comply with all the laws. It's another thing to have no idea what that law is going to be, right? And I don't understand how people operate in that environment. Like Coinbase, for example, right? They famously went to the SEC and said, we want to offer 4% yield to people that hold USDC, right? BlockFi is doing it. Voyager is doing it. Celsius is doing it. Nexo is doing it. They're offering 10, 11%. We conservatively want to do 4%. The SEC responded with a threat of litigation, right? They said, we're going to sue you. They didn't even tell them why they could do it or what law they'd be breaking or what was coming. They just said, if you do that, we're going to sue you with no clarity. How can anyone operate in that environment in the United States? Feel free, any of you, to answer.
I have 2 answers. First of all, some of the things we're doing, not in the second layer providing financial services stuff like yield, but more on how do you, for example, issue stablecoin. What we're doing is complying with current rules and regulations and moving forward with that. Second, I want to offer maybe a more naive, more trusting approach. When I listen to what Gary Gensler says, and I will more or less quote, I don't remember the exact words, but more or less, what Gensler says is the same way that in 1903 Model T came out, we had to, as the government, put road signs and traffic lights in order to allow the technology to scale. This is what we intend to do with cryptocurrency and blockchain technology. And I have to relate to that, and I think that is a sound, valid approach. you look at the bad things that no regulation comes. I look at the amazing things that can happen once regulation comes.
I agree with that.
And as long as this doesn't, I'll put it this way, I hope that the first signs of regulation will come still in 2022. And once this happens, there's nothing else stopping this technology from exploding.
I mean, there's a real problem with that statement, though, and let's face it, this is a massive problem. He starts, unlike Commissioner Peirce, whose idea of a safe harbor to work with the industry to actually come up with regulations that work. He starts from the presumption, and has said multiple times, an absolutely asinine thing, which is that our current rules have worked for how many ever years, and therefore they'll work for crypto, and they should be presumed to work. Keep in mind, SEC rules haven't been updated since the advent of the internet. So we have disclosure rules for companies that assume that people are looking at documents this thick called prospectuses to evaluate risk. It literally ignores all the technology and information technology that has happened in the last 25 years. And this is the world that he's saying we should use these regulations. The answer is obvious. It's zero-based budgeting, zero-based regulation, start from scratch with a blank sheet of paper. And that cannot work without a safe harbor. That cannot work in an industry that is worth billions now and growing. You can't just stop it. This is sort of like he's basically asking us to assume that he can change an airplane engine while the airplane is flying without grounding the airplane. And that just doesn't work. So the truth of the matter is, the U.S. is losing competitiveness, and innovation is being squashed, and people are trying to move forward. Everyone in the industry that's reputable that knows, and Max and I mean, we've talked about this pretty much every time we've ever talked. We all believe that coherent, rational regulation that provides adequate disclosures, that protects investors, that could stop bad actors, et cetera, that's all a really good thing. I don't think anybody disputes that. But it needs to be modernized. We need to understand what that regulation is. And the classic example is his absolute disaster of a policy of allowing a futures-based ETF to trade on Bitcoin without a spot ETF. Trapping.
We just had Steve here, who is obviously the CIO of Valkyrie. Yeah,
I understand that, and it's just there's no good word to say this. He is intentionally harming investors in order to proceed on his political path, and that is what's happening. I mean, investors are being harmed. They're being harmed in two ways. One, incredibly obvious. Anyone who's followed the whole grayscale situation understands. I mean, they were harmed on the way in by Clayton because you had years of a premium that Grayscale traded at, whereas accredited investors got to make money by dumping their bags on unaccredited investors.
Free
and
money.
It was allowed and aided and abetted by the fact there was no ETF. Now it trades at a discount. And so you have literally $6 billion of value held by unaccredited investors for the most part, although there's obviously some people who hold it that were hoping to dump their bags on retail when the premium collapsed. But we don't have to go into who those people are. I think everyone on this call knows who that is. But the reality is it's mostly retail. And with a stroke of a pen, allowing a conversion to an ETF, he fixes that and helps those people. I mean, this is not arguable. And his reason for not approving a spot ETF is even more asinine. Max, is there even the slightest chance that manipulation in the price of Bitcoin could affect the spot markets and not affect the CME futures?
No way.
Exactly. It's literally impossible. And yet, somehow he managed to convince some people at DERA, that's the Division of Economic Research and Analysis. I have friends there, and they're generally incredibly dedicated and smart people. He somehow convinced somebody to write that in his denial releases that, oh, well, the CME is less subject to manipulation. No, that's completely insane. It is. In fact, anyone who says that, you question whether they passed high school math. So it's that is the problem with regulation in this country. We have somebody who has an agenda. It's not to say we don't want regulation, because we do. And you're right. I mean, it would definitely help.
I said I'm maybe a bit more naive. Max, please.
The idea that there's an agenda is the only way to explain those opinions that are put out that really don't make a lot of sense. And I think that's actually what we see with crypto regulation at the moment, depending on the country, depending on the agency, some are more favorable, some are less favorable. And the rules all look similar. If you look at the money laundering rules in each country, they look the same. But then whether the regulator likes crypto or not is going to determine whether they're going to have an actual positive or negative stance. And it's been talked about in the press. That's what you have in the United Kingdom. In the United Kingdom, the regulator don't like crypto. And so, however, although the rules appear to be the same as in Singapore and other countries, more or less, it's just much more difficult to do business in that country compared to others. And so what you find is that on the one hand, in the US, I think you have a lot of product by product regulation. When you want to put out a product, you really have to think how you're going to make the product fit with the regulation. You don't have like a blanket license that allows you to really operate in a lot of different products, of course, unless I guess you're like a fully regulated federal bank or something like that, and even then. And so that's why Coinbase, although they run a perfectly fine business for the most part, when they wanted to start doing lending, they got completely shut down. So it's a little bit difficult to be a company that has you've got like 10 products. 9 out of 10 seem to be working perfectly fine, but then for product number 10, for some reason it doesn't work. You're not allowed to do it. It's kind of weird that the trust that's extended to you by regulators on most of your business doesn't seem to extend to some new products that really are not much. I mean, is it much more dangerous to do lending compared to crypto trading? I don't think so. So that's the product by product regulation. But then also, considering the emergence of a lot of new regimes in different countries recently, I think that sheer luck, I started to play a big part in whether your business can operate or not operate as it used to be. And what you find is that, let's say, roughly a year ago, most crypto companies had to decide, okay, we're going to go after a few of those new licenses. Maybe we're going to go after 1, 2, but you can't go after licenses in all countries. You don't have enough focus. You don't have enough resources to do that. And by the way, talking of resources, law firms and other consulting firms are pretty the biggest winners here. They're making money out of a fist, even though they have no idea what's happening either. And so you're going to go after a few licenses, and you're going to get some, but not all potentially. And that leads to a few things. One, really there's a fragmentation of the market. People were saying a couple of years ago, the market's too fragmented, we need to make it more standardized. But actually it's regulation that's really leading to fragmentation of the market now, because even erstwhile global players like a Coinbase, there's no way they can go after all the licenses. Right. And now once you've decided to go after some of those, it's unclear whether it's going to be you're going to have the regulators are going to give you an easy time or a hard time. And so probably if you were, if you applied in Singapore a year ago, you're thinking, okay, well, I made the right decision. But if you applied, let's say, in Japan, a couple of years ago, and then the CoinCheck hack happened, and then the regulators turned completely, they became much colder to crypto, then it's just bad luck. And so the fact that luck starts to play a much more important part in the success of companies in the space, it feels very weird, because at the end of the day, you would hope that your product market fit, the quality of your staff and stuff like that would be more important. But it feels like, it's a roll of the dice nowadays. Sometimes.
It's arbitrary. Yeah. And guys, I love this conversation, but I want to pivot really quick because we have 10 minutes with Memli. Let me see if I can do it this way. I don't even know. Maybe that view looks better. So guys, if you don't know Memli, he is you can correct me, but the president of the Democratic Party in Kosovo. This man literally helped write the Constitution and bring freedom to Kosovo. Also was a very famous rapper and is a member of parliament. But today, Kosovo just passed a resolution condemning the Russian action in the Ukraine and also saying that they're going to take refugees. So I wanted to have him join us. I think he's literally at a restaurant and has a few minutes. Memli, what's going on there, man?
Hey, Scott. Good to see you again. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to join this distinguished crowd. I'm sorry I missed my time and your time. I thought,
You're here. That's all that
EST
matters.
was, but I'm fine. I'm still in my office actually, and we'll leave in 10-15 minutes. But it's a pleasure to join you. I can't follow you as I used to, but I still read your newsletter on daily basis. So yeah.
Awesome. So talk about what happened in Kosovo today. Obviously, you were in Parliament when I was DMing with you earlier.
Yes, well, today the Parliament of Kosovo unanimously voted a resolution in support of the citizens, the people of Ukraine and the state of Ukraine, condemning the Russian aggression there, and also showing concretely the support of the Ukrainian people in this very difficult time for all of them. We joined the democratic world, the Western democracies, in supporting them in their just fight, because this acts of aggression of Russia were unprovoked and are unjustified. And coming from Kosovo, obviously this strikes a bit differently, because it's just bit more than 20 years that we have had an aggression of Serbia in our country, and we have suffered the disproportionate war, which is Ukraine is suffering now. In Kosovo war, there were about 70% of the people were expelled from Kosovo. We had a real exodus, and now what we're seeing with so many innocent civilians leaving their houses, leaving their country, absolutely, we all agree that we need to offer Kosovo as a refuge for 5,000 Ukrainian refugees that may want to come and take shelter in Kosovo until they're ready to go back. But beyond that, I propose that our government also creates a separate fund to financially help humanitarian aid for Ukraine and its people. But beyond that, I think it was very important that across the aisle, position, government and opposition parties, and I lead the biggest opposition party in Kosovo now, agreed that for this very important situation, that we are all on the same line. There was really a momentous decision, because we believe that Kosovo has always been on the side of the democracy and the Western world, and we're happy that we were able to have this resolution passed today in the Parliament.
It's incredible that it's unanimous, right? I mean, you just touched on it, but I mean, there's obviously, I would imagine, some sort of at least Russian sympathy or influence in Kosovo. Correct?
Well, it was unanimous for those that took part, because just before the vote took part, the Serbian minority list, the party, they left the chambers. They didn't agree with the resolution. Obviously, in the Western Balkans, in this region, Serbia is still a country very much influenced by Russia in its politics and its international stance. Russia is the main sponsor of Serbia internationally. They influence Serbian politics continuously. So obviously, the Serbian minority here is very much influenced by the official Serbian position. And that was why they left the chamber and they didn't vote. So it was unanimous, basically, because 94 MPs out of 120 voted, but 10 members of parliament of the Serbian minority didn't take part in the vote, but they were against this resolution.
I always find it interesting. I'm certainly not a politician, but like the theater of walking out rather than voting against or admitting it, right? I mean, why don't they just stay there, show their face, and vote no?
Well, yeah, no, sometimes it happens. Sometimes there are situations where you walk out to make it impossible for the government to pass something if they don't have the votes.
Right.
But this, I think, was a different situation. They wanted to, probably they didn't want to be on the record as voting against such an important and just resolution. But beyond that, it's important that the people of Kosovo feel the situation very much, and they are following it very closely. And because of this experience that we all had, I think the pro-Ukrainian sentiment is very high.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've been trying to, when Memley and I talked on the podcast a while ago, I was trying to convince him before El Salvador that Kosovo needed to make Bitcoin legal tender, but we haven't gotten there yet, right?
It will come to that. It will come to that. Now, I'm pretty sure. Unfortunately, this government right now is not very much into innovation. It's not very much into digital. But the governments change, and once this government is out of the picture and we are back in running the country, I'm pretty sure that there will be new opportunities for blockchain technology and for Bitcoin particularly. I've been following from day one what is happening in El Salvador, and obviously there's a lot of questions going on, some of them justified, with the way that will influence the development of the country. But there will be a point in time, next 5-10 years, or more countries will join in. But before that, obviously, it's not necessary that every country makes Bitcoin immediately as legal tender. There are many other things that needs to be as predecessor to that, and starting with central banks being more open and more cautious with regard to the blockchain technology and to digital currencies. And in Kosovo, because of the fact that so many young people are involved in cryptocurrencies and the crypto sphere, because the population is very young and people are very, very much well versed in English and well versed in technologies and in the ICT sector. It's one of the easiest countries to do so. But normally, when it comes to having official positions, the government needs to play a leading role, which we lack, unfortunately, right now. Nevertheless, in the parliament this year, we will have legislation with regards to crypto, and I'm pretty sure that it will be quite innovative. Just across the border in Albania, I think you will find the most advanced crypto-related legislation, which was passed a few months ago. And I think that will be a very good blueprint for other countries in the region to follow, and probably beyond our region.
It's interesting because nobody's talking about it. I feel like I'm pretty much on top of what's going on with Bitcoin around the world, and Albania has not been on my radar.
I have respect for what the Albanian government is doing. There are really competent people in the government, but sometimes you really need a champion. You need someone like the current Vice Minister of Ukraine, the Minister of Digital Transformation, to lead the effort and to have a good PR operation behind. And that applies also in peacetime. And I think what was lacking in Albania right now, or in the past few months actually, was this, that there was not someone particularly as a champion of this to make this an international news. But definitely the legislation, which I've read when it was being drafted, is very open. It makes possible for crypto companies to very easily operate, to open accounts and to register in Albania, even exchanges. And it will make things very easy for citizens to use and to go back and forth between crypto and fiat.
Well, you're giving me great hope that we're going to see mass adoption in the not so distant future, certainly in your part of the world. And send that guy my way, man. Whoever he is, find him in Albania, and let's start getting this. Let's start getting some press behind that, because literally something that wasn't even on my radar and absolutely should. Listen, I know you have a dinner to go to, man. So I don't want to keep you. Thank you so much for doing this. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
It's always a pleasure to be in your podcast and your roundtables. Looking forward to next ones. And hello and bye to everyone, Max, Chen, and Dave. Thank you.
So guys, listen, this kind of brought us back around. Obviously, that guy is such a legend, by the way. I love that guy. But brings us back around to obviously the Ukraine-Russia situation. Max, I wanted to ask you somewhat specifically. I mean, you're a market maker. Earlier in this conversation, we talked about, are we actually seeing like real volume now from Russians and Ukrainians buying Bitcoin? Is that why price was going up? Now it's going down as we speak. I see it's almost at 42,000. But, or do you think that this, you would know better than anyone, is a opportunity for traders, short squeeze, or, you know, some sort of technical move? What are your thoughts on why we saw that rise in price right when the war basically started?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's two different things. One, you know, whether you actually do see as a business flows from Russia and Ukraine, etc. And two, the fact that it's a global market. So actually, you know, if the price is going up, it doesn't matter that you see those floors or not. You know, the price is going up maybe because Russians are buying on Wobi. And even if you don't see those flows, the price is going to go up. I remember there was a guy recently who said, oh, but we're not going to be affected by the increase of natural gas prices because our country we're self-sufficient in terms of natural gas. I'm like, it doesn't matter. It's a global market. So even if you're not importing from Russia, you're going to see the impact of higher prices because it's a global market. The price in your country is the same as the price in other countries. And so I think that you look at the most institutional, most regulated businesses, they don't have a huge Russian client base. I don't think that at B2C2 we have a single individual Russian client, or I've ever had one. For obvious reasons in hindsight, you know, even if you could do it, you didn't necessarily want to do it because you have to realize that when you're regulated, the regulators, they can even ask you for like lists of clients and your breakdown of, you know, high risk and not high risk clients, and you know, just having some Russian names on there is not necessarily a very good look, which is a shame. Because
it's unfortunate for your average Russian who is
shouldn't
be on a list.
It's a shame, but as a business, it's kind of difficult to work with that. Now you saw Jesse Powell, the CEO of Kraken, who I love. He said on Twitter, "No, we're not going to cut access to Russian clients because it's not illegal. You know, we can't do that. We have to provide access to those folks. But of course, they respect the sanctions." And the sanctions, they target specific individuals, right? Like it's specific names that you cannot work with, but it's not a blanket ban on Russia. That makes no sense. And so he's going out on a limb, and he has the courage, I have to say, the courage to actually keep working with Russians, broadly speaking, even in the current situation. Now, even Kraken, in my business and similar businesses, typically we don't work with Russia a lot. But you look at the Binances, the Wobi, all the Chinese exchanges.
Huge volume.
Really important for them, Russia. Actually, Turkey as well. So Turkey, Russia are very big countries for those exchanges. So I assume the biggest flows have been there. But obviously, you know, everyone trades on Binance. And so if you've got Russians buying there, well, you're going to have other people in the same market. So it's a global market. And we've seen indeed a decoupling of equities and Bitcoin recently. Bitcoin's roughly basically outperformed equities by 15%. And the question is why? I think that there might be a narrative that's going to come back into the picture more aggressively in the coming weeks and months. It's the idea that Bitcoin is an asset that you cannot confiscate. And that's quite important. I remember I checked in maybe a year, 2 years ago with my friends on the rates desk that I used to work with at Goldman, and asked them, hey, what's the zeitgeist there? What do you guys think of Bitcoin? Because obviously they started to get a lot more interested in the 2019, 2020 rallies. And he was telling me, well, there's a lot of different reasons, but people seem to center on the idea that the unique selling point of Bitcoin or crypto in general is you can't take it away from people. It cannot be confiscated. And at the time, no one was really thinking about that because it wasn't important. But with this new round of sanctions, I think that's one of the main reasons that Bitcoin is going up. Now, I don't think the narrative is going to stop there because we all know now that Bitcoin is highly traceable. You know, if you've got Bitcoins and, you know, you're Russian and you're sanctioned, no one's going to work with you anyway because they're going to know that it's coming from you. And so that ship has kind of sailed. But one thing that we've not seen yet is really the emergence of privacy coins like Zcash and Monero. And if you look at Monero versus Bitcoin, Zcash versus Bitcoin, really the price is in the doldrums. Like for the past 2 years, the price action has been really bad. But I think that might actually change. So that's going to be something I keep my eyes on in the next couple weeks and months.
What I think is interesting in that regard, so there's the narrative, and it sort of goes to what you said. It's a global market, so you can't just say one thing. Price went up because these people are buying it. You can have the secondary effects of even the idea that those people are buying it, right? If you're a billionaire, if you're a millionaire, if you have any wealth anywhere in the world, and you're seeing what's happening in Canada or what's happening in Russia and Ukraine, you don't have to be in Russia or Ukraine to say, holy shit, maybe this is a flight to safety. I want to have a little bit of money in this. Everywhere in the world, you're going for the first time, even in the United States, I think people are literally saying, I guess it could happen, right? Like my bank account could be frozen, or maybe, there's some situation where I wouldn't have access to my money. So seeing it happening there, even though we can attribute it to those people are buying, doesn't that kind of trigger people all over the world to look at it and, like you said, start to the narrative of not being able to be confiscated?
Yeah, and close to home, the truckers in Canada, right?
That's what I'm saying. I think that's much bigger actually than what's happening in Ukraine and Russia, at least for people in the United States, when they went, holy shit, Canada is freezing bank accounts and like blocking people who tweeted a Bitcoin address. It's crazy.
So I would say that this is compounded by more and more people. What COVID did, one of the things COVID did is make many governments, almost all of them around the world, print money in scales that never happened before, and the realization that paper money is not really scarce, compounded by the fact that paper money, we're seeing now what can happen with him at times of emergency war acts all over the place. This compound effect in the long run, while I will not offer any short-term predictions, that I'm not in that business, I am seeing, or believe at least, that more and more people around the world see the compounding reasons of why this technology makes sense and why this is a good store of value that is better than the current way we store value.
I think that one misunderstood point quite often is when people look at Bitcoin, I like to compare it to cash, the actual paper money that you're talking about, right? And it has a lot of, there's a lot similar to it. You can transfer it from person to person. You could stuff it in your mattress. So in the case of Bitcoin, you don't need to have nearly as many lumps in that mattress because obviously it's much more portable. But the reality is it's also digitally, you could do the same thing. I mean, if I wanted to send $10,000 in value to Max, I mean, I don't know where you are right now, but it doesn't really matter with Bitcoin. If it was in cash, I'd have to get a suitcase and go on an airplane and, whatever. I mean, it's harder. But there's two differences, one good, both very interesting with regard to Bitcoin, and a couple of similarities that bear discussing. The difference is, the first one is Bitcoin isn't something that federal governments can just create and, print, money printer go burr. It doesn't happen. That's what you were talking about. It's backed upon, effectively by the value ascribed to it by its adherents and its owners. And the truth of the matter is we talk about Bitcoin and its volatility, we all understand that if Bitcoin truly were to become a store of value that rivaled gold, its value would be 10 plus times where it is today, which means that it's going to be volatile, right? That kind of asymmetric return profile is something that, Max, you've been dealing with modeling volatility for most of your adult life. And we all know that that's going to make it look very different than, a shiny rock, right? Gold is not going to have the same kind of volatility because it's already at the place where people sort of ascribe its value to. And you can't really even debate that. So that's one thing. But the other thing that's interesting is I will push back against the Monero narrative because of what the regulators and what politicians are saying. And Elizabeth Warren yesterday said something that was mind-bogglingly stupid. Literally mind-bogglingly dumb. where she tried to use, because Elizabeth Warren hates Bitcoin because it threatens her on two levels. And I'll get back to what I mean by that later, in case you want me to go off on why. But let's just say she has an agenda. She hates it. So what was mind-bogglingly stupid? Well, mind-bogglingly stupid is saying, well, cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin are going to help avoid sanctions. Well, no, they won't. You know, they do not help the government of Russia, a nation state, or a billionaire avoid sanctions because of everything Max was saying. It's traceable. Now, they're not going to be able to trace, 100 million people deciding to buy, $1,000 worth of Bitcoin. That is untraceable. But you want to trace a billionaire buying $1 billion worth of Bitcoin? The FBI and Interpol will have zero issues. There's a reason, and I listened, and I think I said this the last cast. The FBI loves Bitcoin when criminals use it, loves it. They honestly, I've actually talked to a bureau chief of the FBI who has told a conference I was at, and I asked him later, and he said, listen, we don't publicize this fact because we want them to think that it's a great thing to do. But when child pornographers or drug dealers use Bitcoin, that helps them. So why is it mind-bogglingly stupid to say that? Well, it's mind-bogglingly dumb because if the goal of sanctions is to harm the ruble and to destabilize the Russian economy and make Putin hurt, what's the thing that's going to hurt him the most is if the majority of his population decided to put their life savings out of ruble, took them out of the banks and put it into Bitcoin, what's going to happen to the banking system?
Steve McClurg said that earlier. Exactly.
Yeah, I heard him say it, and I've been saying it for 2 days too. So you have both sides of it. So here you have U.S. politicians taking very poorly researched, bad opinion pieces in various press, from reporters who or opinion, pundits who don't have a clue what's going on, and trumpeting it on the literally in the Congress saying, "Oh, well, we need to do something about Bitcoin. Here's the reason," and it's completely wrong. And that's sort of the rhetorical world we live in. We live in a world where people, say things and they don't really understand it. But getting back to cash, if you think about what's a good medium, the government is fine with cash for two reasons. One, because it's massively politically popular. Everybody knows that if you've ever had any work done in your house, in the United States for sure, I don't know how this is in other countries, certainly in Italy, it's absolutely true. If you've had any work done in your house, the contractor is highly likely to say, well, one price for pay me by credit card and one price for cash. And it's not just the credit card handling fee is the difference. Let's face it. We all know what that means. And the government essentially hates this, but doesn't hate it enough because it's in small sizes. And they know it's politically crazily popular. So the bottom line is we live in a world where Western governments, and I make fun of Italy, but I've heard people make I used to trade Italian equities. I've heard some of my friends would say like 50% of the economy is in the cash economy. I don't know if that's true or not, but the truth of the matter is the governments tolerate that because it's politically popular and it gives people freedom over small things. But when it comes to big things, try to buy a house in Bitcoin and think you're going to get away without paying taxes on it. Not going to happen. You want to buy a watch on the street? Yeah, maybe. And that's sort of the difference. So Bitcoin, by being pseudonymous, being hard to trace, if you're trying to trace, if you're not going to get 100,000 or millions of people doing little things. That's not what it's designed to do. May very well be in a really good digital sweet spot globally, where it effectively allows for things like Russian people who are innocent, and we can debate that, but most of my lineage is Russian, and I have lots of friends who have family over there. And the reality is most of the Russian people are either innocent or at least ignorant. And why should they suffer? And then the other is well publicized, the donations. I mean, how much money is being raised in crypto that is going to Ukrainians that are displaced and dispossessed? And do you really want to stop that? Seems to me that's a really good thing. And it would be very hard to argue against it. So we're in this really interesting rhetorical world where people who want to hate an asset class are trying to trump up reasons and are effectively tripping over their own logic.
I would say, Max, go ahead, please.
There's an insight that Dave mentioned that I want to make it even a bit crisper. There was a great tweet 1 or 2 days ago, which was that people are suddenly rediscovering the difference between assets that are someone else's liability and assets that are no one's liability. Yeah.
And Alden. Yeah.
Ah, good. There you saw it too. Yeah. So that's a concept that not everyone understands, but it's very good once you've intuitively understood it. Is that often when you have an asset, really someone issued it, and for them it's a liability, it's a debt, right? And there's other assets, it's not. So to take the biggest examples that we've seen recently is Russia at $600 billion of dollars at the U.S. Federal Reserve, and those got just confiscated.
Gone.
Just confiscated because the dollars were a liability of the U.S. of the United States, and the state just said those dollars, they don't exist anymore. They're gone, essentially, right? I mean, they're frozen for now, I imagine. And so that's an asset that's someone else's liability, and most financial assets are like that, if not all. Now you've got Bitcoin, and it's a bit like gold, right? When you own gold, it's not anyone else's liability. You just own the gold. And Bitcoin is like that. You've seen gold also rise up. Well, it's not back to the highs, but it's up to 1930, something like that now. So gold also rose quite a bit. And people are saying that central banks are now maybe refocusing on purchasing gold on the back of what happened to the Russian central bank. And that's quite interesting. And in this context, all of crypto, or most of it, I guess, except stable coins, perhaps, it's not really anyone else's liability. So those make for very good assets.
So some of it is, but Scott, I want to go back to something you said earlier that makes me, despite some of the ignorance that we see, at least in US, when US regulators speak, this is what makes me optimistic is the fact that, as you said earlier, once you get it, there's no way back. You don't see anyone that says, I got Bitcoin and now I'm in the past and now I think it's a bad idea. And I don't think just about Bitcoin, I think about the entire technology. Once you get it, then you believe and you understand why this is so important. And I think it's only a matter of time where more and more, first of all, the simple people around the world that will influence their elected officials. Yeah. This is a train that left the station, right? This is not going back. It is only a matter of time. And as such, I am a little bit more tolerant of some concerns that are raised by current legislators and regulators. They need to be educated. More and more will get it over time, and we will get there. And we're not talking about 20 years. We're talking about,
I agree,
a much shorter time frame.
Yeah, I think that there's a very, very defined line between concern and willingness to actually do the work and learn, and being just dismissive and aggressive against it on principle or along whether it's a party line or some ulterior motive, right? And we've seen this, I think, of late in Congress, which is really interesting because a few months ago, there was a congressional hearing and there were leaders from the crypto space, and it was basically like a screaming fest with Congress people and senators just telling them effectively they were scammers, Bitcoin was dead, it was bad, all these things. But then there was another one recently, SBF, who was here last week. He had his shoes tied wrong and everybody memed it. But I think that there was this stark change where there was a willingness to learn from the Congress people and senators that were there. They were asking legitimate questions. They were trying to understand. If you're willing to do the work, then I get it. Like, you have a concern, but you're asking a question that you want answered with an idea that your opinion could change. That's not the same thing as just saying they're avoiding sanctions using this and we need to look at it. That's complete nonsense. It's stupid, as Dave said. It's just FUD. It's just FUD. It's not true. Americans are not going to just use Bitcoin to transact with Russians now because they're cut off from SWIFT and risk being violating sanctions, right? It's just not going to happen.
Someone that sees the in the middle layer, right, that sits and speaks to not the senators necessarily, but the ones who advise them.
Yeah, that's who we talk to.
I am at least seeing people that are taking the time to learn.
I agree. I agree with that.
So, right. So this is the reason for optimism. It will take time. and this is scary, and this is moving the cheese, and as such, it is scary to people who are used to seeing other things. And I'm therefore much more tolerant of all these comments that are a lot of FUD. It will take time, but we will get there. That's what's important. Dave,
I'm shaking his head.
I'm shaking my head because someone want to come into my reading. I actually agree with you. I'm shaking my head to that. I harken back to my university days. My mentor at Northwestern was the dean of the School of Speech and taught rhetoric and communications. And I'm optimistic for a different reason. I think the rhetorical framing of the issues that matter are changing and changing in a good way. For a while, we were stuck in this right versus left, which was conflating lots and lots of issues on the right with lots and lots of issues on the left. And I think people, young people in particular, are honing in on the fact that government control versus freedom does not have to be inextricably linked to whether or not you want to help people or whether or not you want to crack down on their social lives or any of the other things that right versus left embody. And so there are some politicians who are clearly more concerned with government control than they are with necessarily helping people. But the reality is there's been some great threads on Twitter and places lately on why Bitcoin, embodies progressive values. Now, that is very hopeful because at the same time that we're seeing that, we're seeing people who were viewed, let's be charitable and say not favorably, come out and have incredibly valid defenses of why Bitcoin matters, the most obvious of which being Ted Cruz. I mean, I think if you had surveyed consensus back the last time before this year, it was in person and had 10,000 people take a test and say, what do you feel about Ted Cruz? I don't think it would have been very good. I don't think he would have had a whole lot of adherence there. I think probably if he was lucky, he'd have gotten to 30%. Take the same thing today, and he'd be at 75%, at least if they've read what he's been saying. And I think that people find that very strange. Well, the reason isn't because necessarily that there's been a massive sea change. Yes, he's probably been orange pilled. Yes, he's done the work, and his staffers probably have learned. But the reality is the vector that is starting to matter more is freedom vis-a-vis government, not vague ideas of whether or not we have social safety nets or universal health care or universal child care, any of that stuff, but really what should the government be intruding into and what should people be allowed to do with their lives? And I think that was really helped. Justin Trudeau did the world an enormous favor by being dumb and by showing that it could happen. That people who are just conducting civil disobedience could have their accounts stolen. I think there's zero chance now, at least in the next decade, of a central bank digital currency that's fully programmable ever being allowed in a Western country, because the politics are going to be like, are you kidding me? We can't have all of our livelihood being snap frozen because you decide you don't like what I say. And he made it clear. So it's going to be a really interesting issue. I mean, talk about a single issue voter. I mean, I feel bad for Sanaya, who's at the Federal Reserve, who wants to advance the technology and make payments and things more efficient. But the reality is a fully programmable central bank digital currency is a massive threat to freedom. And Justin Trudeau proved that beyond the shadow of a doubt, no reasonable doubt. You literally can't say, oh, well, they'll never do that. That ship sailed. It's gone.
Right. What's crazy about that, I think. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I don't think that from what I'm listening to these discussions and I'm reading what the Fed publications, I don't think that, at least in the US, they think differently. I don't, there's a very big difference between a retail CBDC and a wholesale CBDC between the banks. And at least from what I'm reading, they get that. And what China is doing with the digital yuan will also prove the same point. And that is not a bad thing.
That's right.
So, Scott.
No, you guys can certainly go ahead. I was just going to say that the concern, I think people's privacy concern with CBDCs was they'll see all my transactions, or they'll be able to just take out my taxes or drop stimulus. And that's a whole other level from what you just described, Dave, right? It was already a huge privacy concern. Now you have, oh, by the way, you don't have a wallet or any money, which is a completely different ballgame. It's
another nail in the coffin. I've been saying for years that retail CBDC is unlikely to happen because it would compete with commercial bank deposits. And the commercial banks, like Citi and JP Chase, they're the ones that make the mortgages. And so if they don't have the deposits, they cannot make the mortgages. And so people don't usually see the link between deposit at a bank and mortgages, but that's what it is. And so if you start having the ability to just put your money directly at the central bank, it starts competing with that. And I don't think that would be very positive. But that's another nail in the coffin, that just people are going to be distrustful of such a CBDC. Germany is a country that is very against, they love cash in Germany. If you've ever been to Germany, it's very difficult to pay with a bank card. And them being very close to Ukraine and Russia, I think that's going to even, as you said, that ship has sailed. I don't think we're going to see retail CBDC anytime soon. And on wholesale CBDC, I think it's unnecessary because all the banks already have, good access to payment systems. It's quite interesting.
I agree. One thing that you said that kind of I would like to react to is banks continuing to have deposits and issue mortgages. As we see, in my eyes, the DeFi ecosystem mature, get regulated, etc., the notion of holding of banks providing financial services without any additional value add is going to disappear from the world anyway, because it's just going to be much more efficient to do it using DeFi. And again, one thing I do again want to emphasize: everybody's still going to have to pay taxes for all these things. It's not. I don't see a world where we don't pay taxes, but still, this is just such a more efficient way to do it.
I wonder if we'll ever see a world where we don't pay taxes on effectively our unrealized gains in crypto because we've been trading in and out of different coins and never made it back to the dollar. But I guess that's a different conversation. I mean, there's we can talk about not paying tax in the United States. We are, and I remember coming in 2016 to crypto, like anecdotally, and my friends who were in it were like, "It's amazing. You make all this money trading and nobody reports it. There's no taxes." And then you find out that literally there's people who made $1.2 million. One of my friends made like $2 million trading, but only went back to Bitcoin. The market crashed, obviously, in 2018. And he had a $200,000 portfolio with like $800,000 to pay in taxes and didn't realize it. So I would say that like, we're not going to get more aggressive, right? Everybody's going to pay their taxes, but I think we should be moving, obviously, the other direction.
Yeah. And more DeFi financial services. I want to say DeFi subprime mortgages, what could possibly go wrong, right?
Oh, well, yeah, it's going to have to be a hell of a lot more secure. But I mean, I think the idea, whether it's done in DeFi, but even the idea of eliminating some of the middlemen by, I don't know, NFT mortgage, we're already seeing that starting to happen. Even just like getting rid of the crazy escrow processes and the long waits for moving the money and for being vetted and all that. That could be.
Scott, yeah. Title insurance is my favorite. That's the first thing.
All right. What a
and with that, guys, I need to drop this. Thanks so much. And
thank you, man. It was a pleasure. Look forward to having you guys on again.
Bye-bye.
So, but that actually bears a little bit of explanation. Title, I just bought my condo down in Miami, so I laugh about it's just whatever. Compared to New York expense, it's so much cheaper. It's like,
my floor is awesome.
I'm not going to complain. But the thing about DeFi that I can remember years ago, before I even knew DeFi existed, I made the comment to Larry Tabb that the whole world will trade digitally in 20 years. And I meant a lot of different things. There are some things in the banking system that may stay. I mean, understanding personal situations, etc., I don't know. But the one thing that is very clear is I'm reminded of a comment made by Joe Biden, of all people, yesterday. Maybe one of the only things I agreed with outside of his Ukrainian stuff in the State of the Union, whereas he said he's a capitalist, but capitalism without competition isn't really capitalism. And he's right. Well, our banking system in the United States has almost no competition. It's oligopolistic, and there are many, many, many activities they do that are devoid of competition. Pretty much every financing activity, whether it's securities, loans, repos, basically all the stuff that you use to trade, Max, every one of those is affected by barriers to entry and oligopolistic anti-competition.
And state by state.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Good luck figuring it out in any given state. Right?
Oh yeah, it's very true. So if you look at DeFi as ultimately a competitive methodology and technology to allow true competition to get into various financing activities. Now, there's a lot of nuance and a lot of different things that have to go on there. It's really hard for anyone to actually look at that and say, okay, that's not going to be better in the end. But since a lot of the reasons that the world has so little competition in a lot of these places is regulatory and lobbyists that have been bought and paid for by corporations who want barriers to entry, that's really the fight. And I'm reminded on Twitter, I get into fights on equity market structure with people all the time who just assume regulation is good. And yeah, some regulations are good. There's this rule that has been ignored by this SEC, which says that every new regulation has to have a proven or at least assumption of cost benefit.
Mm-hmm. I think it's very true. There's a real lack of competition in banking, especially in the US. And the contrast with Europe is massive there. So I'm in Florida actually today as well. And I've got a bank account in California from when I used to live in San Francisco. And you want to make a wire transfer between two states, it's $20-$30. People use checks. That makes no sense. Whereas in Europe, you want to make a payment between countries, not two states, right? Two countries, let's say Estonia to Spain. And by law, it has to be free. By law, it is zero. And companies typically, I think at most you tend to pay like 50 cents to make a payment. And the reason for that is that the European Commission has enforced competition. But regulation is the real problem in the US because every bank has to be licensed state by state. I mean, we remember when Coinbase started and Gemini as well, they started going, state by state money transmitter regulation. It took them forever. Some states were very difficult. It makes absolutely no sense that there's no single federal regulation that you can get the license and you can operate everywhere. That's actually the reason that prices are so high. I mean, sometimes you're like, well, regulation can be. You have a direct link between high prices for consumers and excessive regulation. So
it bakes in the United States when you dig in. There was a recent report forget even the cost of wire transfers. When you dig into how much money they make on the small fees, it's literally their entire business. I mean, wire transfers, overdraft fees, ATM, all those things. It's mind-blowing how much money they make and how predatory it is. And that's mostly from people with the smallest accounts who are affected.
There's a very funny tweet by, I think, Louis C.K. He said he had $16 in his bank account, and then that was too low, so he got charged a $20 fee. It was at -4. I mean, it's worse than broke. He has -$4,
Yeah.
Yeah. I hope it's going to get better.
You get literally charged for not having enough money in your account.
Yes, you're too poor, so you have to be charged for being poor. Yeah, that's really funny. And
what's funny about that, and it's obviously true, is that is one of the reasons why I'm somewhat optimistic, because it is very, very clear that a growing number of voters are starting to realize the same thing. And so there's this election may be too early, it may not be, but it'll be very, very interesting to see how many voters start caring about, well, we need to preserve our access to Bitcoin. There's a particular election in California where Brad Sherman is arguably the biggest critic of Bitcoin in the Congress, and he's running against
Cobra Coin and Mongoose Coin.
Yeah, he's running against a former teacher, I think, Erica Rhodes.
Yeah.
Who has the attention and donations of the crypto community. And this is not a right versus left battle. I mean, if anything, she's probably to his left on most social issues.
They're both Democrats.
And they're both, it's in the Democratic Party, but it's not moderate versus, it's not along typical lines. It's literally about the question of, do you support the legacy financial system to the exclusion of competition or not? And that's becoming the knife edge issue. And that issue is one that is totally bipartisan and should be bipartisan. And that's, to me, that's going to be an interesting acid test. And I guess we'll see in June.
I mean, do you guys really think we're far enough along that Bitcoin becomes a legitimate voter issue in the next election? And Max, you were about to say something anyway, so you don't have to answer that. You can go continue with what you were going to say.
I'll try to answer it at the same time. You said there's going to be one acid test. There's going to be a second acid test, I think, is we have to Bitcoin has to survive 2022. And it's not going to be necessarily that easy. There's a lot of positive tailwinds, but there's also going to be potentially some headwinds. And, you know, as we have been running businesses in the industry, we know that the number one concern, the number one thing that makes things easy or difficult is the price of Bitcoin. At $65,000, you know, we had bankers, you know, falling over themselves to give us financing and things like that, you know, but at $3,000 in the March 2020 crash, not so much. And so Bitcoin has to survive 2020. And when I look at it, and it's going to be about macro a little bit now, you've got the good tailwind of confiscation, sanctions that I think should support the price, and that's what we've seen recently. But also, we've got inflation fears, and that's twofold there. On the one hand, people keep saying that, you know, Bitcoin is a disinflationary asset. So when there's inflation, when the money is debased, as in, you know, with quantitative easing and things like that, it's good for Bitcoin. And surely you've seen that, you know, all valuations, include, you know, from startups to equities, have been supported by easy money, and Bitcoin has also been supported by easy money. So, you know, you would be tempted to think that inflation is good for Bitcoin. Now, the problem is that at the same time, well, Bitcoin isn't a cash-generating asset, so it doesn't have cash flow. So, you know, it depends really how you think that it survives inflation. But let's assume that inflation is good for Bitcoin. Well, countries are going to fight inflation. And we've seen that now. The month of February was massive in terms of interest rates just before the war. I was looking at the 2 years out Euribor futures, so where the rates are going to be in Europe in 2 years. They went from 0% to 1% in a week. Massive move. Also in the United States, rates went much higher. But then the war not reversed that, but there's been a big retracement just because, there's an expectation it's going to be maybe an economic crisis, things like that. And so now we don't think that it's going to, central banks are going to hike as fast. Now, Powell, central bankers in the US were on the record recently again saying, no, we're still going to hike,
0.25 though.
Yeah, we might be in a weird situation. We have both inflation and easy money. That might be good for Bitcoin. But I think high interest rate would not be so good for Bitcoin. So, I take no pleasure in saying that, but I think that the war in Ukraine actually is quite positive for Bitcoin from that standpoint. One, you cannot confiscate Bitcoin, but also it's likely that we have at the same time inflation but low interest rates, which should.
That's my favorite cognitive dissonance among Bitcoiners, myself included, is that you go. Bitcoin is a hedge against inflation. Bitcoin's a hedge against inflation, and the price goes up. And then the minute that a government admits that inflation is actually a problem, Bitcoin goes down, and then people panic. And you're like, money printing's bad, but turn those printers back on so my Bitcoin can go back up. Right?
I think it's really, really important to talk about who is the marginal buyer and seller, and that's what's influencing that. So. There are two cross currents at work. I mean, as far as I saw yesterday, that the amount of longer term holders of Bitcoin hit an all time high at 76.3%. I mean, it was from Glassnode. That's interesting. But what do I mean by that? I mean that most of the price action is determined. All price action is always determined on the margin, and the marginal buyers and sellers of Bitcoin for quite some time, certainly since. We hit the all-time high, months ago, have been speculators or people who aren't committed one way or the other who are trying to trade it. Now, as a speculator, when you see rates going to rise, it's sort of the buy the rumor or sell, in this case, sell the rumor, buy the fact kind of deal. You, of course, it's a speculative asset to you, and rates are going to be extremely relevant, and that's what Max is saying. If, on the other hand, I was a large asset owner who was making an allocation to protect wealth for 10 years, I wouldn't give a toss about that. I would just stuff it. And if anything, I would say that because I know the Federal Reserve is trapped and can't possibly do what Volcker did. In that particular case, those people aren't going to care. But those people, when they trade, are much more patient. And they are much more willing to dollar cost average. They may have certain levels where they get more aggressive, etc. That is completely consistent with the bottom of the trading range that we've seen, because you have people who in the 30s are like, you know what, I'm happy to sit here and buy, and it's not going to go much lower. I understand that, and I'll accumulate. But when the speculators start jumping in, I'm going to ignore them. And I'm going to say, yeah, you do what you want. And, and that level will ratchet higher over time, but it's a slow sort of thing until you reach a point where more pools of capital that are trying to accumulate are able to accumulate, and they can't get in fast enough because they can't start even accumulating a position. It's a really interesting tap dance, which is why the one Bitcoiner expression I love is slowly then suddenly, because that's but I also will say that suddenly could be in 2030. I have no time preference whatsoever, other than the fact that I'm assuming that I'll still be alive, or hoping I will still be alive at the time that it happens. But beyond that, I don't care. I just look at it as there's a bet. It's an asymmetric one that Bitcoin will at least reach gold's market cap and probably beyond it in $2022 or 2022 euro. And I don't know when that's going to happen. So I look at this and it's like, why am I going to chase it if there's been a big green candle? And so the actual accumulators aren't chasing. And the speculators, when they see the Federal Reserve hiking, it's like, oh God, that's going to hurt me. But context is key here. And I've said this before, I'm sorry for repeating myself, Scott, but the federal budget deficit in the United States is 134% of GDP. When Paul Volcker raised rates to 6% over the inflation rate to break it, it was 34%. Our federal budget deficit at 134% is massively undercounted because it excludes pending Social Security and Medicare benefits. If you include that, we're closer to 280%. There is literally no way the government can finance its debt with long rates and even intermediate rates or short rates, wherever they're funding themselves, at 7.5%, which would be a real interest rate of 0.
Yeah.
So we
have to wind down here in the next couple of minutes, obviously. But I want to say two things, and then we'll keep going for a couple more minutes. But one, you say slowly then suddenly. It's our favorite catchphrase. And I love that the velocity of crypto is so fast that we don't view what's already happened as suddenly. I mean, in 12 years, it's gone from non-existent to like multi-trillion-dollar market cap in crypto. And every day something blows my mind in this space, especially now, with the war and everything that's happening. So I find that interesting. And then we talk about the Fed and rates and all this. I want to go back to something Max said because it always makes me laugh. You're watching a chart of what Fed rates or central bank rates in various countries are expected to be in 2 years. And that changes drastically overnight. And we're supposed to trade on that information or make decisions based on something that could happen 2 years in 2 years that's drastically changing, which is the same dog and pony show as the Fed saying we're going to raise rates 3 times. And then Goldman says 5 times and the Fed says 4 times. And that's good news because it's not 5, right? It's all smoke and mirrors, all of it. So like, I think that to me is such an important point. When you're trading and you're thinking about it, all these things matter. But like if you're an average person, you just see this slowly and then suddenly has been happening since the inception, right? And you don't think about all this shit. You just buy some. Am I wrong?
No, I think that we love to talk about that stuff because if you're a finance person, what is great is that stuff is tradable.
Yeah.
Those future outcomes are tradable, and that's what also makes it exciting. You can have views on the futures on so many dimensions, especially as a rates trader. I love it.
And it makes the market much more efficient. I'm just saying when you zoom out and like listen to it as a third party who's not in it, you're like, we're talking about the rate in 2 years and it literally just cut in half today. How does that matter, right?
Especially a 10 basis point move is kind of big, but it's 1/10%. No one gives a shit, if you're a normal person. But I wanted to say, Dave, I think your analysis was very insightful.
Well, thank you, Max.
You guys are.
The reality is that, you know, you and I both spend our lives staring at data screens and, you know, helping clients navigate what happens in the next few minutes. But it's always important to keep perspective on what you're looking at. I mean, one of my favorite expressions to talk about traders is it's amazing how a large down move creates so many long-term holders. And the truth of the matter is, and that's in it doesn't matter whether I'm talking stocks or shitcoins or Bitcoin.
Passionate community members, Dave. Passionate community members that are in it for the tech.
The truth is that is true. And it is funny. And I make fun of people all the time for it because it happens. But in the case of Bitcoin, it's one of those things where a huge percentage of the people who hold it actually are long-term people that aren't ones who bought it because they bought it at 20,000 and, oh my God, it dropped to 5 and I got to wait till I get out. I mean, the amount of selling from those wallets of people who bought at 20,000 back, you know, in 2017, 18 or 19,000, whatever the number was, there was actually a really small percentage that got sold when it rocketed through that, in the not so distant past. And it's just a different sort of asset for that reason, because there are actual genuine believers. I mean, I'm sure people who will say they're believers in Dogcoin hell, there are people who believe in AMC stock. That blows my mind, but I don't think it's the same thing.
I agree.
Anyway, I have to jump too, so.
We all do. I think, yeah, we all do. It's that time. Guys, thank you so much. First of all, both of you are invited back literally anytime. Dave, I can feel you becoming a extreme regular, and I'm going to probably make you quit your job to become a pundit. Sorry.
Not going to happen.
Okay, no talk smack on YouTube. Max, it was great to catch up. Thank you so much for taking the time. I guess I'm going to pull you guys off and conclude this. So thank you, guys. Peace.
Great to see you guys.
Take care. Bye.
What's up, guys? So, guys, that was once again an absolutely epic conversation. I'm trying to think. Thank you, Sahil, Bill, Steve, Chen, Max, Dave. Who else do we have? That's it. Steve, Memley, of course. Paolo Arduino did not make it. I was looking forward to talking to him about stablecoin adoption and the role in Ukraine and Russia, because he's obviously the CTO of Bitfinex and Tether. And I was saving that conversation for him, which I really wanted to have. But we're going to do this every single week. You'll see these same familiar faces, also with additions. I think that, it's interesting. We have all these conferences and Twitter spaces and roundtables. It's very different to be able to just get a bunch of people on, see where the conversation goes, see their faces while they're actually talking, and do it completely for free on YouTube. So I'm really excited you guys joined. Thank you. Please, because I don't care if you like or subscribe or whatever, but if you like the conversation, share it so that we can have more people watching, certainly in the future. Guys, thank you once again. I'm going to be back tomorrow morning. The new cadence is every day. We're going to do the every weekday at 10 a.m. I believe Crypto Burb might be joining me to talk technical analysis in Bitcoin. That is not confirmed. And all you guys, your thoughts with Mike, my producer, who I know you guys all love, who's getting his ass out of Russia right now. So guys, thank you very much. I really appreciate you joining. See you tomorrow. Peace.
Let's go.